This is the first model kit I ever built. I saw a picture of the Spitfire in a book about World War II, and I thought, I gotta make one of those. A few years later, when the hobby firmly had its grip on me, I figured I'd give it another try. I wanted to see if I had improved it all. I'll admit it's a little heavy-handed on the pin wash and the weathering, but I was very pleased with this result. And to be honest, it took me quite a few years before I even thought I could attempt a better one. Well, that time is now. And third time's the charm, right? This, in fact, is the exact same kit as the other two. The only noticeable difference being the decals. This isn't a very technical kit, and I'm sure there are better ones on the market, but that's not the point of this exercise. I wanted to see how my work had changed through the years on the exact same kit. And what I realized was, these planes say a lot more about me as a modeler than I initially thought. So as I assembled the cockpit, I thought back to my early years as a modeler. I was of course happy with just having enough money to buy a kit, and I loved looking through magazines at the pros and their resin cockpits and aftermarket details that would cost more than the kit itself. So this time around, I didn't want to just include new and improved detailed parts. I wanted to design and make my own. But first, I had to remove the detail that was there. And sure, you could use a hobby knife, or you could use a rotary tool. Be sure to start slow so you don't damage your work, or else you're buying a new kit. I designed each part in SolidWorks, and I used a test print to dial in the dimensions for the exact fit. I used the National Museum of United States Air Force website for the bulk of my reference material. They have some amazing 360 cockpits that you definitely should check out on their website. And with everything printed and primed, it was time to start on the painting. I gave everything a base coat before inserting it into the aircraft. I wanted to make sure the sides fit and could get glued in place, and any over-glued areas could be cleaned up and fixed before I went on to the detail painting process. Most of the time I use CA glue for resin parts, but in this case, the Tamiya cement softened the plastic enough that these fit right in. Then it was just about adding some highlights with the airbrush before moving on and painting the details. If you are interested in trying this out in your very own kit at home, you can buy the STL files on my Etsy page, which I will link below. The instrument panel is probably where I didn't get as much detail as I wanted. In the kit part, you can actually see little plastic dials and things that I just could not get the printer to replicate at that size. But I was thrilled with how the seat came out and the heads-up display for the gun sights. I printed in clear resin for the very first time, and I thought it came out awesome. I've been watching a lot of Mike Rinaldi videos and his oil paint rendering, or OPR, technique, and I have to say, I really love using oils again. In fact, it's probably the first weathering technique I started with as a young modeler. So it's interesting seeing that I've moved past some of the newer techniques that I had learned and gone back to some of the older ones. Here I'm just test fitting some of the cockpit. It works a lot differently than the kit part, so it took a little bit of engineering to figure out how everything was going to go into place. And of course, being resin, it is extremely fragile. But at the end, everything worked out really well. And I think the detail, while you can't see much of it, is far more improved over the last two tries. It's important that you rescribe all of the panel lines, which is something I definitely did not do the first time around, and even upon really close examination the second time around, it was not as clean as I previously thought it was. Since I'm on this kick of improving parts, I decided to make the gun bay accessible, so I cut out the part in the wing very carefully, and then thinned everything down so it would look a little bit more in scale. Once it was cleaned up, I fixed a lot of the holes, rescribed everything, and then printed a gun bay that I designed myself in SolidWorks as well. Took a little bit of work making sure it fit in the wing there, but I'm very happy with how the final result came out. I also love changing the flaps and ailerons on aircraft wings. So I did a little bit of that. Nothing crazy. I didn't actually move them out of position that much, but it's fun to reinforce those panel lines, and it makes the painting a little bit more interesting as well. Here I'm taking much more time to glue up the wing. I think I built the first aircraft in a day, maybe like an afternoon after school, probably glued it together and painted it all in one evening. So this one took about 2 to 3 weeks, so a little bit longer. Here I'm remembering the same panel lines caused the exact same problems. Still haven't figured out how exactly to get that fitting perfectly, but I used some plastic putty, and that worked really well on getting rid of that detail there. I like using this plastic putty because it's water-based, and I don't have to sand this down when it's in this awkward location. It fills the gap without need for sanding and then rescribing. So keep that in your stash if you don't have it already. Something I did on the second build that I didn't do on the first one was drill out the exhaust. But something I've always kind of loved on these Spitfire kits is this improved exhaust look, so I printed that out as well. And then it was about making sure everything else went together just perfectly. And it did. I actually got the propellers right this time, which I messed up the second time, but not the first time. Here's a little trick I've picked up for masking out the cockpit. You just use a pencil and find that little ridge. And then when you peel that off, you can cut that out and make individual templates. I don't know if this works on every aircraft. I don't build tons of aircraft, but it works on this kit. I know I should probably get a better tape than just painter's tape, but this does work fine for me. But it's a little heavy. Here you can see that process a little bit better. And even if they're not there, you can kind of judge where that line should be and make a nice straight edge. But in this case, it worked out really well. For spraying, I made a separate little tape and foam cover. Then I just mounted everything down on some tape to get ready for easy spraying. After I primed the aircraft, I started on the bottom and just laying a base coat down. I don't really love doing that panel line thing, probably because I'm not an aircraft modeler. I don't really know what that's called, but where you highlight everything with black. I just kind of wanted to do this a little bit more freehand and kind of paint it the way I paint my armor models, which I enjoy. I know a lot of you paint armor models, so I thought if you wanted to give an aircraft a try, you can still paint it basically the same way we do and get pretty good results. I did highlight the panels like we usually do in armor modeling, and I thought that gave it a nice look. I actually did just get a question about this putty, and you do want to work fast with it because if you leave it overnight, it does tend to seep and it will change its shape. So when using any sort of putty like that, remember gravity is definitely going to pull it down eventually. Something to keep in mind. I'm painting some of the details here. I didn't get too crazy with a lot of this since it's such a small scale. And I found that these decals were kind of terrible. They're a slightly different color than the previous two kits, and this one in particular fell into like 10 pieces when I put it on. But I did enhance some of the details underneath there, so you could see those details actually pop. I added some things that were not in the kit. This part was, but it broke. I reprinted some of that just for fun. And then I went back into the OPR oil paint rendering method to really highlight some of those details without doing a full pin wash on every single detail. Now this is kind of like a pin wash, but it's really more of like a highlight in the center and a dark area around all the lines. I know Mike Rinaldi says work from light to dark. That is not what I did here, but I am still learning the process. So if you want to know more about that, check out his videos because I don't think this is quite it, but I am using oil paints more, and I really, really enjoy how they made this whole paint job work. So I'm going to be using that a lot more in the future. I tend to think that pin washes, when you just slather them on everything, or even if you try and be delicate, I think sometimes they get away from us and they tend to change the entire color of the paint layer that we're working on. I think a lot of newer people to the hobby tend to think, I want to make all these lines pop, so I'll just douse everything with a pin wash. But you can see that nice light color there still shows through, even though we have the panel lines more accentuated. I think that would be one of my #1 tips to improving your models is try and keep things as light as possible. I think we start off with colors that match historically, and then when we weather them and pin wash them, we just make everything look so dark and desaturated and shadowed that it takes away from all the hard work we did on those previous steps. So my #1 thing would say try and pick almost lighter colors and then highlight things, and try and keep that more saturated, highlighted look. And it might not be historically accurate, but I think it makes a more pleasing model than just something that looks like there's a nice paint job under a brown patina. So basically I weathered the entire aircraft with oils. I did do a little bit of dust work at the end, but I really did everything with oil paint. You can see I make highlights here, and I drag everything in the direction of the airflow because any streaking would be going that direction, whether it be watermarks or debris like this from the exhaust. I didn't go crazy around the cannons like I did in the previous build. Kind of wanted to keep it a little more subtle and nuanced, and I really think I achieved that with this build. And I'm really happy with how it came out. And some of the extra details I got from kind of looking at reference photos and things like that, the more you can look at the actual vehicle you're modeling, I think the more you'll get. Even if it's not the exact vehicle, something similar, you'll be able to pick out some fun details that'll make your model your own, and it won't just look like every other one that everyone's building. Here's the dust. I did use a enamel product initially, and I didn't like the look of it, so I moved back to the oils. And there's that final result. The first time I built this model, I wanted to build it quickly so I could fly it around my parents' dining room because I saw it in a book and I thought it was cool. After falling in love with the hobby and really wanting to improve my skills, built it again, and kind of took all the skills I thought I understood and mashed them all together. And with this build, I think I took a more nuanced approach, and I'm really happy with the results. But I'm excited to see what the fourth one looks like. But that's not for now. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the full build style of video I'm attempting now. Only thing left to say, see ya!